Welcome back. Again, I'm Candice Jones. I'm so glad that you guys have been joining us today for Justice That's Just. I love the conversation we had this afternoon with Kelly. The panel inspired me. That's my favorite part of it, just listening to the work that's going on. And I hope that you guys are sparking some joy and enjoying yourself. I love looking at your messages in the chat and hearing the questions and responses from the panelists. I'm excited for this next conversation because this is so much about what this day is organized around, how we stay the course and continue the work. And this actually has been a real personal journey for me, both as an individual and as a team lead, to think about how we start to think about self-care to sustain the pace of what is really difficult work. Kelly's conversation helped us put that in historical context. We are doing a generation, multiple generations fight. And if we know that that is true, how do we need to take care of ourselves? I'm excited this afternoon to be joined by two women who've been thinking about that a lot. Gina Clayton-Johnson of Essie Justice Group in California and Amanda Alexander of the Detroit Justice Center. Both incredible leaders. Hey, ma'am, how are you doing? Gina, Amanda joining us. Before I let you guys jump in, I'm going to embarrass you. I'm going to read a little bit and run through your bios. I have to do it. So please humor me. Gina is the founder and executive director of Essie Justice Group, a group that does incredible work on behalf of women who have loved ones that are incarcerated. She looked across the field and saw something that wasn't there. And like any good Black woman would do, she got up and created it. She just has an incredible resume. She's a USC undergrad, Harvard Law grad, has won an incredible number of awards, including a Soros Fellowship and Echoing Green Award, all the things. I love that we're going to have a conversation with her about self-care because she is clearly an overachiever. So how do you have them both? I can't wait to get into conversation with Gina about that. But before I do, I'm excited and always thrilled to introduce our partner, Amanda Alexander, also a founder and executive director of the Detroit Justice Center, doing incredible work. When I talk about the Detroit Justice Center and try to describe what they do, I'm like, they're changing the world. You can't just say it's justice reform. You can't just say it's community building. You can't just say it's economic development. It's all those things. They're trying to design the world and the space for equity that we all want to see. Like Gina, Amanda has an incredible resume. She is a BA from Harvard, a PhD from Columbia, a JD from Yale. She also is a Fulbright scholar, has won incredible number of awards from including a Soros Fellowship and Echoing Green Award. Both of them have been published. We're thrilled to have them here to talk to us about, with all the things that we're doing in the world to make it a better place, how we sustain the course by taking care of ourselves. Gina and Amanda, how y'all doing?
Doing well. Oh my goodness.
Can we start a conversation about self-care with a check-in?
Absolutely. I'm doing well. I'm calling from Los Angeles County. I'm in Altadena, California right now. It's where I live, and it is a hot week. We're in the middle of a heat wave, and so we're just kind of trying to muscle through that, but I'm doing really well, and I'm so happy to be here to have this conversation with you, Candice, and of course to be in conversation with Amanda, always one of my just beloved comrades and friends in the work.
I love it. Amanda, how you doing?
I am doing well. Really glad to be here with you guys. It is always a treat to be able to be in space with Gina and with you, Candice. So yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. It is actually cooler here than it has been, thankfully. And so I was able to have lunch outside in my garden and not be totally sweaty. It's really nice.
I love that. I want to start the conversation by talking about your organizations. They have incredible missions. The service that they're doing in this world is exactly what we need to see. Talk to me about that. Amanda, I'll start with you. Talk about the Detroit Justice Center and its mission, the core work that you're doing.
Sure. So for us, it's really important to focus not just on what we are tearing down. There's so much talk in the criminal justice space about what we are ending. What needs to, stop. We are tearing down jails, we're tearing down prisons, all of that. But we also want to focus on what we are building up in the world that we are creating. And so we do that through what we call defense, offense, and dreaming under one roof. And so the defensive piece is where we provide legal services and meet people where they're at in terms of some of the most pressing needs that Detroiters have when it comes to criminal legal system involvement. So we house a bail fund that has bailed out hundreds of people from the Wayne County Jail in partnership with the Bail Project. Our attorneys are helping people resolve fines, fees, tickets, warrants, suspended licenses, child support debt from periods of incarceration, all of these things that keep people shut out of the future of the city. And then we go on offense with our economic equity practice. So that's where we have 2 attorneys who are focused on creating new approaches to affordable housing, working alongside people who have been doing urban farming in Detroit for decades now, but wanted to secure the ownership of the land that they have. So helping them to create things like community land trust, helping organizations to start worker cooperatives. And so really thinking about what are the economic alternatives to capitalism that will help us build sustainable communities. And so that is the work of the economic equity practice. And then we dream with our Just Cities Lab. And so we have a one program manager there who is focused on building out a new Metro Detroit Restorative Justice Network. So this is really working with people who have been doing the work of conflict mediation, de-escalation, restorative justice for a while, and just needed some help building capacity to hold more and more serious cases. We've launched that network in the past year. And then we're also doing some work around Divest Invest. So we have a community reinvestment program manager who is supporting work around Divest Invest at the local and state levels.
I love it. I love it. Gina, talk to us about Essie Justice Group and their incredible work.
Sure. So Essie Justice Group is a California-based organization. We are a loving and powerful community of women with incarcerated loved ones. So the mothers, sisters, daughters, wives, partners, girlfriends of people behind bars. We organize women and gender nonconforming people who have loved ones behind bars using a healing to advocacy 9-week cohort model. And the way that we recruit and bring women into our sisterhood, our membership, is actually through a nominations process in which we receive letters from incarcerated people who write to us telling us about the incredible and extraordinary love leadership that women across the country, really, we primarily focus in California, but we get letters from all over describing the work, the sacrifice, the love that women are exhibiting in the age of mass incarceration in all of these unseen ways, right? So we'll get letters from people that say, the reason why I am motivated to stay in my programming, to have hope and can be connected to spirit and self is because my mother writes to me, because she takes care of my children while I'm here, because she puts money on my books, and I want her to have community. And so with every one of those letters, we pick up the phone and we call those women and say, we just received a beautiful letter from your son who's incarcerated. And, we know he said he's incarcerated in Sentinel State Prison, and we'd love to read to you what he said. And that first touch is a isolation breaking, healing touch. And with it comes an invitation to join our sisterhood. But we are so much more than a support community and a healing community. We are actually very much on the mission to end incarceration's harm to women and communities that we come from, and to build a Black feminist liberatory future for all. And so what that means is that we take on issues such as pretrial reform and sentencing, police and sheriff accountability at local and national levels. We are a proud member of the Move for Black Lives, are central architects of the Breathe Act, founding members of the National Bailout Collective. So also have been doing Black-led bailouts across the country, but really in California through our organizers every year for the last 5 years. So we've been in it and certainly following, very inspired by Detroit Justice Center and so many of our colleagues who are right there with us. But that is a little bit about what Essie Justice Group is up to.
You guys are doing incredible work. So if I'm thinking about all the things that you just listed, Gina, or thinking about the work to defend and to dream, Amanda, that you talked about, you both were founders, and part of the thing that you were also thinking about, both dreaming about and defending, was the space and sanity for the teams that you were putting together. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about how you guys were thinking about that as you were establishing the mission of each one of these respective organizations? Gina, I'm going to come to you first this time.
Sure. And, I think when I think about who we were thinking about first, I have to be honest, it was our members, right? And I think what I just described was that we really started, we're an advocacy organization. We're a campaigning, base building, power building organization rooted in organizing and, long tradition of Black centered, Black led organizing work. But for us, it all started with really breaking isolation and healing. And that started at a membership level. And so what that meant was that it actually was that orientation and that principle, that commitment of healing, of really taking the time, because I will tell you that I had so much pressure at the very beginning. And I'm curious, Amanda, if you had this too, but I was getting constant questions like, what is your policy agenda? What are your demands? What's your campaigns? And I was like, whoa, we are just bringing the folks together right now and hearing what's on their minds and hearts and like trying to heal from that, trying to build, relationship and do deep listening. And it felt like there wasn't time for that. But realizing, I think, having gone through kind of the fight to create the spaciousness for that work, for that base building, that, kind of intentional sisterhood creation work to exist, made us realize that this is something that actually requires kind of strategic integration of policies, of structures, of actual concrete things in our organization to make sure that we are not doing, I think, what the default setting is, which is like everything has to be urgent and everything has to be, like out there in front and visible and winning and, and I think that kind of set us on a path towards creating the Black feminist institution value sets that have led to kind of the types of benefits and the types of work practices that we have adopted and really integrated and innovated around at Essie.
I love it. I'm going to build on that question. Did you have that pressure, Amanda? Talk to me about it and talk about how you thought about building that mission at Detroit Justice Center.
Absolutely. Still feel those pressures, and I think it really takes intention to unplug from that and say that we are not going to be hooked into this kind of culture of crisis and emergency. And instead, we're going to understand that this is long haul intergenerational work. And that in order for us to fight not just for small policy wins or thinking about an 18-month legislative cycle or a 4-year election cycle, we need to think in really long terms about Black liberation and what it's going to take to expand Black joy and Black freedom and to create communities where people on the planet can thrive. And that is not the work of a 2-year strategic plan, like that is work that, many generations have been doing and will continue to do. And so I think, it takes real intention to keep training ourselves to think about how do we keep a long range view and sustain ourselves and our spirits in order to be able to keep showing up for decades, hopefully, and to be elders who can pass on wisdom to young people who are going to continue this work. And so I think very intentionally from the beginning of starting DJC, I didn't want to create or recreate the types of organizations that I've always seen, as being an organizer or in movement spaces for 20 years, I've always been in spaces that were a recipe for burnout and that burned through brilliant young people in 2 years or 3 years, and turned people off from movement work. And so it has always taken a lot of intention from the beginning to think about how do we interrupt that and to create something different. And so back, 5 or 6 years ago, when we were doing some volunteer movement lawyering work that would become the seeds of the Detroit Justice Center, many of us were working, 70 or 80 hours a week. We're doing the urgent movement work on top of our day jobs. So we would, people were public defenders. I was running a prison and family justice project representing incarcerated parents by day, and then trying to support the movement for Black lives with protester defense in the evenings. And we were not moving in a space that was sustainable. And so it was important to me to think about how can we create this, create space for the work that is urgently needed that movements are asking us to do, how can we shift that into the 9 to 5 so that then we can have time and space to live our lives and, be and cook dinner with our friends and garden and dance and do the other things that make us feel alive. And so that is something that we have tried to do from the outset at DJC. It is certainly a work in practice, especially to try and do something that is so countercultural. And we, I think we fail each other and we also succeed, but it's all part of figuring it out as we go. Part of setting that culture is, from the very first interview that I or my colleagues do with people to bring them into the team, we ask people, what do you do to practice self-care? And part of that is communicating to people that this is something that we value. And also it's a way of learning about each other. Because when someone says they love gardening, I'm like, great. We are gonna share tips on garden centers, or if someone wants to bike, wonderful, let's bike together. It's a way of figuring out how to support each other in our self-care practices. The other question that I ask is, I say, we have an opportunity here to co-create an organizational culture from scratch. And it can be a place that feels like, we are full of joy when we come into work and we feel like we're doing work with a purpose. What are some elements to you of a really dreamy workplace? And the sad part is that many people don't have an answer to that. Yeah. What they have is a lot of horror stories about organizations that they have come from. And so there's a lot of, people talking about pretty traumatic experiences, but not really having a vision for how it could be better. And so part of it is pausing and asking ourselves, what do I need in order to feel supported? What are some things that I would love to try with colleagues in order for us to be able to support each other? And there have been a couple of practices and policies that we've had from the outset that I think have helped us, but I'll get into that.
I love that. No, this is spot on, Amanda. The one thing I just want to say, because you're talking about how you invite people to be a part from the moment they come into the organization, I want to make sure that we're inviting. I see you guys in the chat. There's going to be an opportunity at the end of this conversation for you guys to join us. So please, in the Q&A section, drop questions that you have for myself, Amanda, Gina, so that we can talk about them, because we want you guys to feel like you're going to be a part. We actually have some questions to pose to you towards the end, so get ready to that. We expect you guys to be active and engage with us in this conversation. I'm ready. Amanda, talk to me about the actual policies that you guys have worked on and put in place that you think really sort of protect the kind of culture that you wanted to create.
Yeah, so a couple that I'll highlight. The one is we have a communications policy that we borrowed from the Sustainable Economies Law Center out in the Bay Area, SELC. And that is one where we really try and hold each other to not calling, texting, or emailing about work outside of work hours, so not in the evenings or on weekends. And I have never worked in a place where I have not felt like I was on call 24/7. And so it's something where it really takes us collectively committing to this, because as soon as there's one or two people who are emailing about work on a Saturday morning and other people are checking it and chiming in, suddenly everyone is working all Saturday. And so it really is something that we have to commit to collectively, to say, we are going to really focus and you will have my time and attention while we're all here during work hours, but then we're also going to really protect each other's time outside of that. So that has been one, I think, that has helped us really maintain our focus, but then also maintain our time outside of work. Another is we borrowed a hibernation policy from the Sustainable Economies Law Center as well. And so that is one where the last week in December, we shut down. And I know many organizations do this, fortunately. And the beauty of that is that it's not just a single person kind of like taking a vacation and then coming back to an inbox, that's packed and all these things that they feel like they have missed or that they're behind, but instead it's everybody. Kind of taking that collective pause and then coming back to the work refreshed. And we have done 3 of those hibernation periods, or recharge weeks, we call them, since the start of the pandemic, where we have just realized that we are working in really extreme conditions. And so we need even more opportunity to recharge and come back. And so we have taken staggered over the course, because we're a larger team now. So we have 3 weeks where we take a week off in phases and really protect each other's time. Our colleagues are recharging and they will come back to us. But so we have found that has been helpful over the course of the pandemic to do more and more hibernating and recharging. And Before we went into the December hibernation, I shared with the team this anecdote or the story that Alta Star, who's a somatics coach and trainer, tells, and it's about Frederick Douglass, who was, traveling in the British Isles in the 1840s, and he was, there for a couple of years and raising money for his own freedom and for abolition work in the States and building relationships with abolitionists in Britain, and all of it got to him. And he was just, apparently feeling very burnt out. And so he bought a violin. This was something that made him feel that he came alive. And he locked himself in a room for 3 days. And a biographer said that he was there practicing his violin until he could come out and he felt attuned with himself and could greet the world as a cheerful man. And Alta says, like there's nothing more that we could do that's more important for our movements than to take time like that to nourish our spirits and to center our own relationship with our aliveness so we can get right back to the work. And I wanted to share that with the team because if Frederick Douglass can do this while he's raising money for his own freedom and he has the end of slavery, on his shoulders, we can do this too.
Writing a memoir that would be a legacy of history and leading all kinds of movements, including suffrage. He was busy. Gina, I want to get you in here talking about how you have created policies similarly to sort of protect sanity, protect space, and hopefully spark joy. Talk about some of the things you guys have done at Essie.
Sure. And Amanda, I just so appreciate you bringing in Alta. I was thinking about what are my self-care practices going into this conversation? And the very first thing I wrote down was Alta, because she's my somatics coach. I meet with her weekly and I don't know what I would do without the sustainability that offers. So yes, it's brilliant. We have a lot of different policies that we've been innovating on. And I think that there's this is actually Amanda and I have talked about really wanting to collectivize the knowledge that exists even in this space and hear other people's ideas of what could be even better, different kinds of, more policies. I think there's just a font of just different things that people are trying that we should all have access to. But some of the quick things that we've tried and I think have worked are, despite that we have already some pretty great vacation policies and personal time and sick time, we also took some very deliberate kind of organizational shutdown moments that we called resets. And we set up for those resets very intentionally by providing a retreat in advance. This was all virtual because it was during COVID, or the height of social distancing and all of that. And so we had communicated and worked on really preparing ourselves for our resets in a way that it would ensure that they were not just kind of other times when we would either work or catch up on work or clean out and reorganize our garages or just do things that would leave us just as depleted as we were going into them. There's a way in which we needed to kind of center ourselves into a collective commitment to show up for ourselves during that reset. And I think that was the brilliance of what happened, because we did find that we noticed that, yeah, maybe we would have done it wrong, took our time off in a way that wasn't really off. And so that was one thing. The other thing is, we have a reentry policy at Essie, so that when someone has a loved one who comes home from prison or jail, that they have time that they can spend, paid leave with their family during that process. We provide access to grief counselors and not just kind of the traditional talk therapy, which we also provide access to, but to Reiki practitioners and somatic therapists and coaching, that kind of thing. We also do a $300 a month health and wellness reimbursement for anything that you want to invest in to help you kind of take care of self and be restored for the work. I think that and those are just a few of the things, but I think the most important thing to understand is that all of this is rooted in a reality that this is both a strategy and a politic for us. It's a strategy because we get, and I think this is really beautifully said by Amanda, that our work can't happen if we are not well. It certainly can't happen in a way that's successful and in a way that's sustainable, and in a way that's winning, right? If we are not well. And so we must be well. Number two is that it is a politic that we have to resist, right? The kind of the oppressive realities and conditions that have been foisted upon us that have taught us to deprioritize self, to ignore what our bodies are telling us, to not connect with each other in real and authentic ways, and so many more things, right? So like, it's also a politic. And then finally, I think organizationally, and as like an ED, I think like I have a lot of, I don't know, just like humility about the huge weight of the task in front of us and trying to create these cultures and these workspaces that are really kind of these maroon spaces that are supposed to exist separate and apart from the air that we breathe every day, right? Like Essie is a learning institution. It's supposed to be a place where people can learn things, and in the pursuit of their own growth and excellence in goals and trajectories. And I'm a big believer that you cannot learn, and I know this because I have a 1.5-year-old right now, when I see her learning at the rate of like just, it's incredible. And I think the reason why you learn as quickly as you learn, little girl, is because you get that no one is out here judging you. No one's expecting, you can fall over and stumble and do silly things and scream and run around, like, and you don't have an expectation that like that has to look a certain way or be perfect in any way. You just try. And so I want Essie to be that place. And yet we prioritize hiring Black and Brown people who are directly impacted by these systems and who have been told over and over and over again that we cannot mess up. Yeah. That literally there is no time for us to get something wrong, to take a risk, to stumble without tremendous dire consequence. And so those are the realities that we face when we're trying to create these cultures, is that there's actually inherently in all of us a system of punitivity that operates continuously, that we have to, as individuals, be vigilant about contradicting, about working out of ourselves, about seeing, in order for us to be able to show up the way that we want to. So it is both an organizational responsibility and commitment, but it is, I think, first and foremost, an individual path, a healing, kind of path that we must all be on. And that's what we try to facilitate and encourage people to be on their own healing journeys, toward that end.
I love that. How do you guys think about, to both of you, protecting that in real time, right? Because then the thing that ultimately happens is there's also so much both exigent, but also exciting work, right? You're like, we want to do this and we want to do this and we want to do this, but you have to be like, well, we can't protect that space, that important space, and do it all at once. So how do you guys in practice really try to keep yourselves and the team focused on that? Let's get you in here, Amanda.
And I'll unmute myself. So one thing that we have done that I want to make a big plug for is we have shifted since last summer to a 4-day work week. So we're officially open Monday through Thursday, working 32 hours a week. And yet we have been no less productive, I would say, than when we were working a full week. And what was important to us as we were making this shift was to make sure that we were not just saying, okay, we're doing a 4-day work week, but still people trying to cram in 40 or 50 hours worth of work into 32 hours. And so what this took was prioritizing. And so we actually pulled together like a half-day staff retreat, and we asked ourselves Grace Lee Boggs's question of what time is it on the clock of the world? What is really urgent right now in terms of what our movements need? What are we being called to do? How do we need to show up right now? And this was last July and last August. And so there were suddenly all sorts of things coming onto our plate. We were needing to argue individual release motions for people to get out of the Wayne County jail with COVID, threatening to raise genocide. We had to, fight for an eviction moratorium, first in Detroit and then across the state. So these were new things that were on our plate. And so we paused as a team and said, okay, for everything that we are now putting on our plate, because this is what this moment is asking for, what are we going to take off of our plate that no longer seems urgent? And I think as organizers, as movement builders, we are great at constantly adding more to our plates. But we are less good at saying, okay, we can sunset that program, or we can put that piece of the work to bed for now. And so just making sure that we are really recalibrating as we go in terms of understanding what is the most important thing that we need to be focusing on, and then what does that mean that we can kind of let go of for the moment.
I love that. Gina, I'm going to come to you, but I want to come to everybody in the conversation with us. One thing that I want to put to the entire group, this is a great question that came up in the planning from Amanda, which is, we don't purport in any respective way to have the full breadth and depth of all the possibilities in this conversation. So we're asking you guys to, in the chat, think about ideas that you would like to see in your workplaces in the world to sort of actualize self-care in these institutions doing important justice work. Please join us in that. We want to hear these ideas. Frankly, it helps us all think more and broader about these questions. Gina, I'm going to come to you with a different question, which is for organizations that they haven't done it yet, or they don't yet have the resources and breadth to start to actualize this. How do you think they need to get started?
I would say talk to your team. And I think, Amanda, actually, you're probably one of my favorite question askers. I don't know if that makes sense, but ask such good questions. And I think model really well the way in which we should be engaging with our teams, right? As co-strategists and co-builders. And so that was something that we did at Essie. We knew we wanted to create this culture. Actually, we knew that we wanted to concretize and memorialize this culture in a set of policies, because we built the thing before we wrote it all down, which generally happens. And so there came a time when we needed like very strong employee handbook. And so the process through which we did that was through conversations about, what are our values? We spent time identifying like, what are our values, and talked about our values as a mix of both aspirational and actual. And we actually did this activity where we had, with every value that we came up with, we had people stand in a room and say, okay, how close to actual are we versus how close to aspirational, and to kind of test, right? Because we don't want to say that something's a value and we're not even close to ever, like, we don't practice it. We don't, and we also don't want something to be a value that is so easy, is just us, and we're never kind of reaching for it, right? And so that was a really beautiful way to kind of start that process. And from there, we moved into like, okay, so what are the policies? What do the policies need to look like in order for us to be living our values? And so that's I think how, that's how we started. And it led to some very vulnerable and challenging conversations when we got into the meat of it, because policies are about trade-offs. And one thing I do want to say is that I'm in no way, and I'm a big fan of not being dogmatic about these things, right? If you have an organization and you are at an organization and you don't have a particular policy that we're talking about, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are, that your culture is, bankrupt, okay? It is about the whole, and it is about what is right for that individual group of people. And we knew that for us, our people were Black and brown women with incarcerated loved ones or formerly incarcerated loved ones who had a specific set of like priority needs and realities at the home and all kinds of, and that's what we built our policies around. And so I think like, that's where I would suggest starting, is just with your team. Who are they? What do they want to build, and engage them in the build with you?
I love that. Can I ask you guys, you kind of touched on it earlier, but I actually want to put a finer point on it because I think it leads to the conversation we've been having this whole day. When we talk about self-care, some people frame it as a thing that is a privilege. There are some of us, and I will include myself in this, at points in my life, I've definitely felt guilt when I was away from certain work. And I feel like that's not a fluke or even just sort of youthful. That's a societal thing. That's a bigger thing that has been constructed. Talk about how you work on dispelling that. Talk about how you think it's important to dispel that for the very work we're all trying to advance. I'll start with you, Gina.
Okay, I'm so full of thoughts on this. So this goes back to like, you got to have a politic and you got to have some values, right? Because if it's just policies, they're empty and they're not going to be rooted in anything, and they're not going to be adaptable. You're not going to be able to change them and flex them in ways that are appropriate when it's required. And our politic is Black feminism. And one, central tenet of Black feminism is around the notion of collectivity, right? That like we are, we think about Ella Baker, right? Who says we don't need, strong leaders, we need strong people. And so this idea of individualism that is really undergirds so many of just the political fights that we're in, right? Like our opposition loves them some individualism, right? It's like we're trying to get people to think systemically about defunding, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we're fine. Just keep talking about prosecuting a cop, right? Like that is a manifestation of kind of individualist thinking, right? But individualism lives with us, right? It doesn't just live in the external political realms in which we are engaging and fighting. It is something that we're all raised with. It's the thing that tells you that, you should feel ashamed when you need to reach out to someone for help. Like that little shame, that like worry before you text someone, you're like, oh, but I don't want to bother them, that we've all felt. That's that individualism that is like contaminating our minds and our abilities to do what our bodies naturally need for us to do, which is to be in connection with each other. I think that what we at Essie try to do is to talk about that value, talk about that politic, make sure that we're all aware that it exists inside of us so that we can all be self-aware practitioners of, our own kind of healing and improvement, throughout this work. But it also means like the structural practices, right, that we've all been talking about, and really exposing and rejecting the martyrdom and the individualism that comes with like, if I'm not here, then everything's going to fall apart, right? And the way to do that, like I actually my meeting before this was a vacation checkout. And this has been one of the most important things that we do at Essie, which is that if you're going on vacation for more than 4 days, you have to fill out a form that answers all of these like kind of questions about like making sure that you're going to be really unplugged, and like what's the work you've been holding and who are you managing, and all kinds of questions that then you have with another person who is there to hold all of that stuff for you, right? And so like the transfer, really we let it happen, and we ensure that it happens so that now the person the person on my team I just met with, I know she's really going to be off, because in that meeting I was like, I got that. You don't have to worry about this, right? Like, oh, okay, I'll do that management meeting for you. Okay, this person might reach out to you and call you on the weekend. No, I got that, right? And so like, those are the kind of concrete things that we do to make sure that the individualist tendencies don't show up and kind of live in our work and culture.
I love that. Amanda, do you have, Gina killed it. Like it was a mic drop.
Yes.
Do you want to add anything?
So beautifully put. And I gotta say, we are constantly learning from Essie Justice Group, and they have just led the way when it comes to thinking about Black feminist institution building. If folks have not checked out like some of the webinars that they have and the handbook that they put together over the past few years, please do. It is such a model. But I think, when I'm hearing Gina, the way that I think about it is kind of creating more opportunities for interdependence. And ultimately, this idea of collectivity, that is what our movements are about, is deepening interdependence. And so in order for that to happen, we have to be able to express authentic needs and have them be met. And so I think that it takes a lot of practice. I think particularly for Black women who oftentimes in organizations, there's no point in expressing a need because you have no expectation that it'll be met. And it can be little things like, just making do when you don't have the right office supplies because you just make it work, And so it really takes practice to be able to be attuned to what you need, asking, people to meet that need. And then if you think about times when people have asked you to show up and you've shown up, it feels really good. Adrienne Marie Brown writes about interdependence beautifully in Emergent Strategy. And she talks about it's us weaving each other into this collective. And so when you ask someone to meet a need, you're inviting them into an opportunity for interdependence. And so often, though, we deprive each other of that opportunity, by not asking for what we need. And so Detroit has taught me a lot about what kind of, not just self-care, but what collective care can look like in interdependence. There's just some excellent practices here, and it's led by organizations like Healing by Choice, Women of Color Healing Networks, where I would say, so often there's this practice here where an organizer, has to take a 3-month leave to have a surgery. there's a practice now in community to say, here's what I'm going to need. And someone puts together a spreadsheet of, okay, let's cover this person's meals for the next 3 months. Let's chart out who's going to show up and do some kind of healing practices with them. Who's just going to sit with them and provide emotional support. And here's what it means to provide emotional support. So thinking about that, kind of stepping away to take care of yourself and have a surgery that you need as an opportunity to actually deepen interdependence and have you feel more folded into community. And that is something where I think there's such a deep practice of that here in Detroit around mutual aid and collective care that I hope that can be infused more deeply throughout our movements.
I love that. So we're going to turn now to the questions because the time's going really fast, you guys. You know that it always does. But I want to pose one last question to you both. And the question is, which will be framed by me, these are my words. Philanthropy hasn't always supported this, right? I would say it hasn't supported it in all, and in many respects can be antithetical to it by driving a culture of quick wins and things that we want to see to be able to deliver to the organizations. How do you guys think that philanthropy needs to be thinking about supporting organizations to do just this?
Lots of ideas. And it comes down to, I think one is, encouraging a 4-day work week among grantees. I would say giving enough money for general operating support so that teams have the people that they need to get the work done. I know, especially as a founder, we are used to wearing so many hats, and setting the vision for the organization, making sure that payroll is met, approving every little thing. We're used to wearing 5 or 6 different roles at once. And the beautiful thing about building this organization has been, adding things like a director of operations in HR. Because if we're going to survey staff about their needs, that is something that an HR director can send around, and then based on the responses, can figure out what resources are out there. So that is something that requires labor. And so that is something that people should be paid to do. My life shifted radically last year when I was able to hire a deputy director. Who took on a lot of my direct reports and a lot of the, kind of day-to-day in the weeds managing of the organization. And that is something that, having more funding made possible. And so I would say robust funding so that people can, just fit the amount of work that they need to be doing into the amount of time that they have. And that people in teams are well supported and well resourced. I think supporting things like wellness budgets and recognizing that these things take resources and that our most important resources are our people and each other. And so it's on philanthropy to make sure that we are able to take care of each other and take care of our teams.
I love it. Gina, I definitely want to get you in on this one.
Yeah, big check to all the things that Amanda said. I won't repeat them, but I'll just add funding sabbaticals, I think could be a good helpful thing in addition to the healing grants and support for staff wellness. I think thinking a little bit about grant reporting requirements and just what those look like and whether or not there are ways to make them a little bit more easeful for the grantees makes a lot of sense. And then one thing that this is maybe a little random, I'm curious what Amanda thinks about this, but I always think about how important place is, right? In terms of building inspiration, cohesiveness and team. And so we do invest in our office space being really nice for team, things like that. But we also need to go to nice retreat centers and have time to strategize with good, healthy food and a nice environment. And oftentimes those are very expensive and hard to justify in budgets when you have 2 or 3 options and one is the bare bones. And I think some permission from funders to say go to the nice place, take your team there, would go a long way to let us really kind of do that part of the work. It feels like these are things that we are raised to understand as luxuries and excess, but are actually integral. And there's a reason why these other sectors are doing this when they it's not excess, it's investment. And we ought to be making some of the same. So those are just some of the ways that funders could, I think, help us in the right direction.
I love it. I'm going to turn to the questions now, if that's okay with you both. Peter has a question. He asks, how can we lay the groundwork so that the intergenerational long haul maintains relevance and urgency as it is passed from generation to generation?
I love that question. I mean, I think it kind of comes back to this question of remaining attuned to, like again, this question of what time is it on the clock of the world?
Yeah.
And, what are the things that we need to be doing in order to be nimble and responsive right now to this moment? It's shifting so much. I remember being at a conference a year ago, January, where a bunch of us were down in Miami talking about building a movement for police abolition. And we thought that we were planting the seed for future generations. And then last summer, defund police became a call that was reverberating across the country. And so that required us to shift because of what movement was making possible. And so I think that part of it is about constant reflection on what is possible in this moment. And that will, I think, keep us attuned to, what are the possibilities in this generation. And also, again, this comes back to funders. Like if that means, a shift in some of the work in order to do work that feels nimble and responsive and feels important to this moment, having the flexibility to be able to do that.
I love it. Another question. This is from Hassan Latif, a partner of ours in Colorado. We see you, Hassan. Our folks are prone to crisis moments during their transitions. We feel at the Second Chance Center that require us to be accessible to them pretty much 24/7. How can we, and he quotes, be there, end quote, for them while also being there for ourselves? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, I think I go back to this idea of a team, that, one person can't hold one person. Like a team needs to hold the person in crisis or the person in transition or whatever it is that the intent there is. I think that's at least how we've been able to do it at Essie, because it's so the work is so heavy. We had an incident earlier this year where one of our members took her life, and it was that she had found out that on that same day, she'd learned that her husband was COVID positive. He was incarcerated. She had been dealing with a lot of isolation and so forth. And the ways in which, our team, of course, held that was super heavy. But the fact that it wasn't just one person who had a relationship with her, but that there was a team that had known her and that was working with her in many different crisis moments, made it possible also for the healing that needed to happen in the wake of that to be collective. And so I think about, just again, like how important it is for us to be moving through challenge and through this work, connected to one another, connected to our colleagues, and really able to one person steps forward, the other person can step back, and you kind of continue to do that dance so that you can rest and you can restore.
This is going to be the final question, you guys. I have to ask this. Tell me one thing that you guys are going to do to care for yourself in the next 24 hours, a concrete thing. Amanda, I know you had lunch outside, but what's next? I will lead. This is for me a barefoot time of day. We're having this conversation. I don't have my shoes on. I'm dancing back and forth. That makes me happy. My family is from the South. When I take my shoes off, I am home no matter where I am. And after this, I'm going to put on a Curtis Mayfield record. I will probably play it one more, probably 2-3 times, and then go outside because I need some sunlight today and some fresh air. So that is what I am going to do to take a little bit back for myself. What about you, Amanda?
So I did it before this conversation, and I'll do it later in the day. I try and have a centering practice. And there's a beautiful one I would recommend online, led by Prentice Hemphill, who is a wonderful somatics practitioner and trainer. And this is just taken, I think that one is about 8 minutes long, where you are centering in 4 dimensions, centering. And that to me is a way to dip right back into, okay, this is long haul work. As soon as you're visualizing, future generations, I love this prompt of picturing a young person in your life Now picture their grandchildren, and it becomes very difficult then to, be too stressed out by everything in your inbox when you're thinking in that long range view in so many different dimensions. So centering and having a regular centering practice is something I will do today and each day. I also have a garden, a flower garden and a food garden that, requires water, requires some things of me, that to keep things alive. And so that is one that keeps me kind of centered and grounded as well.
I love it. Gina, last word. How are you going to take care of yourself?
Well, I'll tell you, and I also want to say that us bringing in Alta and Prentice and all of the phenomenal leaders on healing justice, without mentioning Black Organizers for Leadership and Dignity is something that we had to avoid. So huge shout out for Bold and their phenomenal team who really gives so many of us the strength of the sustainability that we're talking about in this conversation. Alta, Prentice, and so many others. Look, I'm pregnant. Okay. So I'm gonna lay my butt down. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm so tired all the time. But that's really like, normally it's like, I'm gonna compost and like, I'd be out there to myself a little bit. It's hot and I'm tired. So I'm gonna lay on the couch for a little while. That's what I'm gonna do. So yeah, that's my centering practice, and also, or not my centering practice. I do have one of those too, but that's my wellness practice right now. And I do have a standing date on Wednesday evenings with a good girlfriend. We talk and catch up on the phone, and that's really restorative for me.
I love that. I'm also probably going to watch the Versus tonight because I can't help myself, and no judgment. I will be excited to see both of them. Listen, thank you guys so much for joining us. We are in awe of your work. We appreciate everything you're doing to advance this work in the world. And I just want to thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much. To you both.
And thank you all for joining us today for Justice That's Just. We have been in awe of all of the conversations we've been able to have with partners all over the country doing incredible work on justice reform. We thank you for everything that you do every day. As I said at the outset, we're not asking you to push harder, to go further, to be stronger. We're asking you this afternoon just to take care of yourself and to rest. We know you're going to do all that other stuff. As has been noted in these conversations, sometimes in this work, you're holding up so much sky and it can start to feel like it's getting heavy. I want to remind you that there is somebody working on this issue to your left and to your right. So if sometimes you have to step away for a little while, it's okay. We will be here with you on the other side. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my team. Putting together a wellness event and doing the work of wellness for others actually takes a lot of work. And so they were behind all the work and the creative ideas that came out today. And I want to thank them for that and acknowledge them. We also want to thank our partners at Meeting Tomorrow and Happy Box, which helped us with the wellness packages that went out to our grantees and partners. Thank you so much for everything you do every day. We see you and we are standing with you. Take care.